There's a particular kind of quiet that lives in a backyard right before the floor of your life drops out from under you. The hiss of fat off the grill. Kids shrieking through the sprinkler 2 doors down. A neighbor laughing over a fence. I used to find that quiet comforting. Now I know it's the exact sound a trap makes when it's already sprung and you just haven't felt the teeth yet. I passed out in my own backyard on a Saturday in late September, the way I had every Saturday since the long weekend in May. I came to on our bed with my shoes still on, the ceiling fan turning slow circles, and the muffled noise of the party still going on without me downstairs. And I lay there and thought, the way I always did, that the problem was me, that I was run down, that I'd been pushing too hard at the clinic, that I wasn't sleeping, that maybe I really was as fragile as my husband kept telling everyone I was. It took me an embarrassingly long time to understand that exhaustion doesn't leave a taste in the back of your throat like a battery. 3 days before that Saturday, I'd sat in a lawyer's office downtown with a numbered ticket in my chest where my heart should have been, and I'd taken home a folder of separation papers I hadn't signed. I didn't even know what I'd write on the line for grounds. I had no proof of anything, just a feeling, just the way my husband had started looking at me like a problem he was solving, rather than a person he was married to. His name was Adrian. He was a financial planner, the kind of man who could explain a segregated fund to a nervous retiree until they handed over their whole RRSP smiling. He had a voice he used for clients, low and patient and warm. And somewhere in the last year he'd started using it on me. "You're not even trying, hon," he said that Tuesday, leaning against our kitchen island while I held the counter and waited for the dizziness to pass. It was just the memory of a barbecue dizziness, but my body had started bracing for it all the time. Dr. Okafor ran every test. There's nothing physically wrong, so either you let me help you, or you keep scaring everybody on the street. "It only happens at our barbecues," I said. "Every single Saturday. I eat, I drink, and an hour later the world goes gray, and you carry me upstairs and the party keeps going? You don't think that's strange?" Something moved behind his eyes. Fast, like a fish under ice. Then his face was warm again. "I think it's strange you're hunting for a conspiracy instead of taking the magnesium your doctor suggested," he said. "You've always run delicate, since the miscarriage, since your dad. I'm not saying that to hurt you. I'm saying it because I love you and I'm worried." There it was, the word he planted years ago, back when grief had genuinely flattened me and watered ever since until it grew into a cage. Delicate. A soft little leash he could tug whenever I got too close to a real thought. "My sister's bringing her butter tarts on Saturday," he added, like that settled it. Like the mention of family was a door swinging shut on the conversation. "Just rest. Let me handle everything." That was the thing about Adrian. He always wanted to handle everything. That Saturday, I didn't eat. I decided it in the lawyer's parking lot and I'd held on to it like a railing. I made a show of nibbling a carrot off the veggie tray, and I poured my own iced tea from a fresh jug, and I drank water from a bottle I cracked the seal on myself, and I waited. My sister floated over around 4 in a linen dress, blonde and glowing the way she always was, the way that made me feel like a smudged photocopy of our mother, while she was the original. Was a nurse, at the regional hospital, and she had that particular warmth that nurses have, the kind that makes you trust them with the needle before you've even felt the pinch. "You look so much better, sweetie," she said, pressing a glass into my hand. "How are you feeling?" "Better," I lied, setting the glass down on the table without drinking. "Just a rough stretch." Her husband, my brother-in-law, was already 3 beers in by the cooler, loud and pink, and back-slapping. A big man going soft, telling Adrian his burgers looked like hockey pucks. The two of them had that easy rich guy ribbing that I used to find charming. Adrian flipping patties with tongs in one hand and a steam whistle in the other. My brother-in-law booming so hard the glasses on the table buzzed. And me, the faint fourth point of a triangle I was only beginning to understand. My spot was the same as always, the Muskoka chair at the end of the patio, the wide red one Adrian always pulled out for me. "Your throne," he'd say. Right beside the propane patio heater he'd surprised me with back in the spring, the sleek black tower he'd installed because, he said, I always got cold in the evenings, even in July. I always sat there. Everyone else circulated. The cooler, the grill, the food table, the lawn. I sat in my throne by the heater and let the warmth wash over me, and I never put it together. Not once in 4 months. I put it together that Saturday, sitting there stone sober, when the gray came down anyway. I hadn't touched the iced tea. I'd had water from a sealed bottle. And still the laughter started going soft at the edges, the colors bleeding, the world tipping into that warm honey I knew so well. And I looked up and Adrian was watching me from across the patio, a burger halfway to his mouth, and his face wasn't worried. It was checking. The way you check a kettle to see if it's boiling yet. It's not the food, I thought, with a clarity that cut straight through the fog. It's the air. It's the heater. It's where I sit. I had maybe 10 seconds, so I used them. I let my knees fold and I went down hard, knocking my glass off the table, a big, sloppy, boneless collapse onto the patio stones. There she goes, I heard my brother-in-law say, not alarmed. Bored. Too much sun, not enough food. Adrian sighing the long-suffering sigh. His arms went under me. He carried me inside and he wasn't gentle about it. My head clipped the door frame. He dropped me on the bed, shoes and all, stood over me for a long minute, and then I heard him laugh under his breath, one soft, satisfied huff, and walk out, leaving the door open a crack. I fought it. I clamped down on the chemical tide trying to pull me under, and I counted my own heartbeats, and after 100 of them I rolled off the bed onto the floor and crawled to the door. The hallway was empty. Downstairs, the party rolled on, and under it, clear as anything, 2 voices in the kitchen right below the stairs. She barely had anything. My sister. Low. I was watching. She didn't eat, Adrian. She didn't even drink the tea I gave her. The heater does it on its own. Slower, but cleaner. No residue. Adrian's voice, but soft, intimate. A register I hadn't heard from him in 2 years. You worry too much. I'm a nurse. I know what the margins look like. This is reckless. So is waiting. The premium's paid. The paperwork's done. Every Saturday she keels over in front of more people. We're laying the groundwork. We just need the last part to look obvious. A tired, anxious woman takes too many of her pills and slips under in the tub. Everyone on this street will nod along. I stopped breathing. I had my hand over my own mouth and I was crouched on the floor of the upstairs hallway of my own house, listening to my husband and my sister plan the way I would die. And the worst part, the part I still can't fully explain, was a small detached voice in my head saying, oh, so that's what's been happening. At least I'm not crazy. And him, my sister said, my brother-in-law. He's getting greedy. He's an idiot, but he's a useful one. Keep him drinking and keep him paid and he'll do whatever I say. A pause. The terrible soft sound of a kiss. A few more weeks. And next Saturday, turn the heater up a little. We'll say she'd been into the wine. I crawled back to the bed and lay in the dark with the sedative still dragging at me, and somewhere under the terror something colder and harder than fear lit up and started to burn. They thought I was delicate. They thought I was asleep. They thought I was theirs. I waited until the last car door slammed and the house went silent. Then I went through Adrian's blazer in the closet, the good one he wore for client dinners, and my fingers found a deep berry lipstick I'd never own and a crumpled receipt from a hotel by the airport, dated a night he told me he was at a conference in Ottawa. It wasn't grief I felt holding those. It was useful. It was a key. Sunday morning, after he left for golf, I locked my office door and emailed the private investigator whose website I'd been staring at for a week. A man named Cormac, whose tagline promised discretion and results, which is exactly what every desperate woman wants to believe. I told him I thought my husband was trying to kill me. I told him about the heater, the beneficiary I needed checked, the insurance. I told him I needed a discreet talk screen and someone to trace a few items. I attached photos of the lipstick in the receipt and hit send before I could lose my nerve. His reply came back fast, like he'd been sitting there. Received. I'll start today. One thing up front, for full transparency. I recognize your husband's name and his associates. Your brother-in-law and I go back to high school in Sudbury. Small world. It won't compromise the work, but I believe in disclosure. I read it twice, and the cold thing in me sharpened into a point. A small world indeed. They brought a stranger into their circle, and the stranger turned out to know exactly where one of them was. Soft. Thank you for the disclosure, I typed. That might be the advantage I need. What followed wasn't dramatic. It was domestic and patient, and it took 2 weeks. And I think that's why it worked. Because Adrian had built his whole plan on me being too tired to look. I washed the sheets that smelled of jasmine that wasn't mine. I went through every pocket, every drawer, in his filing cabinet, the one whose key he thought I'd lost in 2021. I found an unlabeled folder of printouts from our joint accounts, a $50,000 draw off our home equity line of credit 2 weeks earlier, the memo line reading investment. The money went out the same week my brother-in-law's gambling markers came due. Cormac confirmed it. My brother-in-law was into a casino down in Niagara for more than he made in a year. And Adrian was the one quietly feeding the whole, buying his silence, one transfer at a time. The elderly widow across the street, the one who sat on her porch from sunup to sundown and missed nothing, came over with a date swear on a Wednesday. Pearl. 83 and sharp as a tack. You fainting on us again Saturday, dear? She asked, milky eyes going right through me. Just the heat, Pearl. She set the square on my counter and didn't sit. You be careful with that fancy heater your man put in, she said, dropping her voice. Makes a funny smell. Chemical-like. My Walter worked in a paint shop 40 years, God rest him. I know that smell. It gives me a headache clear across the road, and you sit right next to it. She patted my hand, her grip surprisingly hard. You get the worst of it sitting there. Makes the body sleepy, doesn't it? I stared at her, the careful blank mask sliding off my face. I'm an old woman. I talk too much, she said, going bright and loud again. Just air the place out before you sit down. Enjoy the square, dear. And she let herself out, and I stood in my kitchen knowing that the answer to the question that would later baffle everyone, why only her, had been sitting on a porch swing across the street the whole time. Everyone else moved. I sat in my throne and breathed it in. A little more every week. In the garage, behind a case of motor oil, I found a plain box with a small black medical vaporizer inside and an amber bottle with the label scratched off. I photographed it from every angle and took one pill into a sandwich bag. Then I called the first pharmacy on the list Cormac sent me, the ones through the hospital where my sister had access, and in the brisk professional voice I'd learned from a lifetime of being near her, I confirmed a lost and disposed log for a portable vaporizer and a sedative solution requisitioned under her name for a palliative patient who, I was fairly sure, had never existed. She'd built herself a perfect, untraceable loop through her own job, and she'd done it for the man married to her sister. I should say here that I did the right thing first. I want that on the record, because later a lot of people had opinions about why I didn't just call the police, and the answer is that I did. I went to the regional station with my photos and my bag with one pill in it, and I sat across from a tired detective named Ferris, and I told him everything. He was kind about it, which was almost worse. He told me a vapor that leaves no residue is impossible to prove after the fact. He told me a beneficiary change is legal. He told me a financial transfer between spouses is legal. He told me that one unmarked pill in a sandwich bag with no chain of custody was nothing. Right now, he said, not unkindly, you've got a feeling and a husband who'll tell me his wife has a documented history of anxiety and fainting. If I bring him in on this, I tip them off, and they get careful, and you get a lot less safe. He slid his card across the desk. Get me something real, a clean sample in your system, and admission. Catch them doing it. Then I can act. So I went home and I built the thing that would catch them doing it. I'm not proud of how good I turned out to be at it. The opening came when Adrian suggested, like it was a gift, a weekend at a cottage up in Muskoka. Just the two of us, no service, no neighbors, a reset. He seized the idea so fast and so hard that I understood immediately what it was. No witnesses, no porch swing widow, no heater either, which meant whatever he was planning. This time, it would have to be something I swallowed. I packed an emergency bag I never told him about, a change of clothes, protein bars, a space blanket, a multi-tool, a water filter, and the little satellite messenger Cormac had given me. The kind hikers carry, good for one line of text where there's no cell signal. I tucked it in with my toiletries, and I bought a bottle of high-dose B-complex tablets, white and round, and I filed 2 of them down by hand until they matched the pill from his garage stash. A swap. If I was wrong. If I really was just a paranoid breaking woman. The worst that happened was my husband had a very vitamin-rich evening. The cottage was beautiful, and it was nowhere. Pines like a wall, a granite point dropping off to black water. The loons calling so lonely, it made my chest ache. Adrian hammered the last tent peg for the screened fire pit and stood back, pleased, and said, "Just us." He'd packed a metal box he kept blocking my view of, and he'd brought a tin of the fancy hot chocolate from the place in the townships I loved. The good stuff, pre-mixed. That night by the fire, I let him do it. He poured the boiling water with his back to me, his body a shield, and I watched his shoulders tense for half a second over the mug on the left, the one he'd hand to me. He stirred too long. He turned with one in each hand. "Careful, it's hot," he said, holding out mine. "To us?" he said, raising his. "To us." I took a tiny sip, scalding sweet, and then I leaned to set it down and let my balance go and tipped the whole thing into the dirt between my boots. The flash of fury across his face was the realest thing I'd seen from him in a year. "It's fine," he said through his teeth, recovering. "Here, take mine. I'll make another." And he pushed his own mug, the clean one, the one he'd been drinking from, into my hands, because he was certain the work was already done, certain the drug was already in me, and the fastest way to keep me calm was to give me the safe cup. "You always take such good care of me," I said, and I drank it. His. Clean. And he made himself a fresh one with his back turned and didn't put anything in it because he didn't think he needed to. We sat there 20 minutes and I yawned and slurred and let my head loll. And then his mug slipped out of his fingers and thudded into the pine needles and his head dropped back and he started, softly, to snore. I counted to 100. Then I stood over my husband of 7 years and felt nothing but a surgeon's focus. I used his thumb to open his phone. The thread with my brother-in-law was right there. All set, no service. She asked for the trip herself. And then the demands. My brother-in-law wanting 50,000 wired now, tonight. Good faith, his debts called in. Adrian threatening him, telling him not to get greedy before the finish line, and then a transfer, pending, to a numbered account. They were already turning on each other. The jackals were biting. I forwarded the thread to a secret email, took screenshots, deleted the sent record. And in a folder labeled Utilities, I found a second messaging app, and after a guess and a second guess, it opened on my sister's birthday. And there it was, the part I keep trying to forget. The backup plan. A vial. A needle. In case the cocoa didn't take. They won't look hard at a sad, anxious woman with an empty pill bottle and a note he'd written. The needle's just insurance. A twig cracked behind me. I killed the phone screen and went flat into the ferns, and a flashlight beam came swinging through the trees, and my sister stepped into the firelight. She wasn't supposed to be there until morning. She'd gotten nervous. She always did the heavy lifting and then second-guessed it. She saw Adrian slumped and out, saw the 2 mugs, saw the spilled cocoa, saw the empty space where I should have been. She shook him hard. Did she drink it? When he mumbled that he'd given her his mug, that she'd spilled hers, I watched the math happen on her face. "You drank it," she hissed. "You drank the cocoa." And then she went very still and very calm. And she looked at the edge of the point and the black water below it, and I watched her decide. Fine. This is better. She drugs her own husband, and then she goes off the rock in a fit of guilt. The note checks out. The pills in her system check out. She crouched and opened a small medical case and took out a syringe. "A little extra help for you, handsome," she told my unconscious husband, "so you don't wake up and ruin the story." She was going to kill him right there and hang both of us on me. So I grabbed the heavy steel lantern off the table and hurled it into the trees to my left, away from the water, and it crashed and clattered through the brush like something enormous, and from the dark I dragged up the lowest, ugliest growl I had in me, and my sister, the nurse, the calm one, the one who knew the margins, screamed bare and dropped the syringe and ran. She didn't even look toward the ferns. She just crashed back the way she'd come, her flashlight bouncing until the dark ate it, and a minute later an engine roared to life on the road and tore away. I came out. I wiped the syringe and pressed Adrian's slack fingers around it and tucked it back in her abandoned case in her abandoned pack. I threw one of my shoes off the point and listened to it splash. I tore a strip off my flannel and snagged it on a broken branch at the very edge, a last, desperate grab for life. Then I texted Cormac one line, "The nest is stirred," and I walked into the black woods with my emergency bag and my space blanket, and I waited for dawn, shaking, freezing, and more alive than I'd been in years. It took me 2 days to walk out to a road and call a ride from a town I'd never heard of. By then, the search was already a sad, frantic thing focused on the lake below the point. They'd found my shoe. The local news had a tearful clip of my husband, the grieving man, hoping for a miracle. The first thing I did in that town was walk into the ER and ask for a full tox screen, documented, witnessed, chain of custody intact. The clean sample Ferris had asked for. No anxiety medication in my blood at all. High levels of a sedative metabolite, the kind used in palliative care, the kind you'd need a nurse to get. I didn't fake amnesia. I'm telling you that because I read later that people thought I should have, that it would have been smarter. But I'd had enough of pretending to be less than I was. Instead, I went to Ferris with my tox report and my forwarded messages and my photos, and I watched a tired man's face change, and I said, I want to give it to all of them at once, on their own ground, in front of witnesses they can't lean on. And to my surprise, he said yes. The rest moved fast, because I made it move fast. Cormac got a remote access drive onto my brother-in-law's computer and pulled the offshore transfers, the desperate betting accounts, an email chain 3 months old where Adrian laid the whole thing out. The barbecues are key. The foundation is laid. Every Saturday adds a witness. He pulled the scanned life insurance policy off my sister's cloud. The beneficiary line changed 6 weeks before the fainting started. My name crossed out. Hers written in. Designated caregiver. The poetry of it took my breath away. They were going to have my sister inherit my life. I planted a small voice-activated recorder in the base of the lamp on Adrian's side of the bed when I slipped back into the house. The house everyone thought was empty. The house with my own ghost in it. I emptied the prescription bottle of sedative someone had planted in my medicine cabinet under my name and filled it with a filed-down B complex. Let him try to drug me with vitamins. And I had Cormac send my brother-in-law a forged email, made to look like a misfire from Adrian's account, showing Adrian planning to cut him out and disappear with my sister and all the money. Then I sat back and let the recorder catch what happened to a plan when three thieves stopped trusting each other. I called the insurance company's fraud line myself and told a careful, breathy claims investigator named Holt exactly where to look: the beneficiary change, the palliative meds, the forged decline of a healthy woman. I told him there'd be a gathering on the weekend. I told him to come. And then I called Pearl across the street and I asked her if she'd come to a barbecue. The last barbecue smelled like every good summer of my life. Hickory smoke and char and cut grass, and it was the worst smelling afternoon I can remember. The whole street came. The families, the curious, the kind. The ones who'd watched a fragile woman keel over on those patio stones a dozen times and clucked their tongues. Pearl in the place of honor with a plate of squares in her lap. A man in a too-warm jacket by the fence who was Cormac. A tall, calm man chatting with my sister by the sliding door who was Holt. And Ferris, parked one street over with 2 uniformed officers and a radio. My brother-in-law was sweating bourbon, watching the gate eaten alive by the email. My sister laughed too brightly and touched too many arms and brought the same potato salad she always brought. Adrian put his hand on the small of my back, the old gesture of ownership, and murmured, "You sure you're up for this, Han?" My clarity unsettled him. I'd stopped playing Fragile that morning, and he could feel the script changing under his feet. "I need this," I said, smiling at him. "To feel normal? You've taken such good care of me." When the burgers came off the grill, I tapped a knife against my glass. The yard went quiet. I thanked everyone for coming. I said the last few weeks had been confusing. For everyone, but mostly for me. I said being home here was all of them, was helping me remember. And then I set a little Bluetooth speaker on the picnic table and said I'd found the strangest old voice memo that I must have recorded in my sleep, and I pressed play. The crackle of a campfire. Then Adrian's voice, slurred and certain. She drugs her own husband, then goes off the rock in a fit of guilt. The note checks out. My own growl. My sister's scream. "Bear, get up. There's a bear." And the crash of her running. The color left Adrian's face. My brother-in-law's glass shattered on the patio stones. I tapped my phone again, and the Queen recording from the bedroom lamp played. My husband's calm voice discussing which dose, which method, how it would look. A gasp went around the yard like wind through wheat. My sister lunged for the speaker and found the claims investigator standing politely in her way. "I'd like to hear the rest, ma'am." Adrian's mask came all the way off then, the grief gone, the charm gone. Just a man whose kill had been taken from him. "She's unstable," he shouted at the street. "She forges things. She needs to be committed." "Forges things," I said. I held up a photocopy of the journal they'd planted. Pages of my decline in my own hand. "I'm left-handed." Whoever wrote this leaned the pen like a right-handed person. I held up the policy. "Beneficiary changed 6 weeks ago. To my sister." I held up the bottle. "Vitamins. I swapped them out a month ago. There is no anxiety medication in my blood. The hospital report says so. What's in my blood is a palliative sedative that a registered nurse signed out for a patient who doesn't exist." My sister staggered like I'd hit her. The warm nurse was gone. What was underneath was all teeth. "And you," I said, turning to my brother-in-law sweating cornered. "The 50,000 off our line of credit into your account to bury your markers. Did you get the email? The one where he was going to leave you with nothing?" That was the thread that snapped him. He went at Adrian like a freight train and they crashed into the grill, burgers and tongs flying. Two soft rich men finally being honest with each other in a suburban backyard. And when Adrian tore free and turned, all the calculation gone, just hate now, and lunged at me, I didn't flinch. Because I'd been waiting for it. I said clear and loud, "Now." Ferris was between us in 2 steps. The uniforms came through the side gate. They cuffed Adrian, while he screamed that it was her word against his. And I leaned in close, just for him, and listed it quietly. The transfers, the pharmacy logs, the credit line draw, the syringe with his prints in her pack, and your partner, who is already talking. He's been talking for 10 minutes. My sister bolted for the gate in the hedge, and it didn't open. I'd had the smart lock she helped Adrian install reprogrammed 2 days before. She rattled it, frantic, and turned with her back to it, chest heaving, and the detective read her rights against the cedar. I picked up a clean burger off a fresh plate, walked it over to Pearl and put it in her hands. Then I raised my iced tea to a yard full of stunned faces and I said the food was safe. I'd made it all myself, no secrets, and I drank it down without breaking eye contact with a single one of them. I was not the fragile woman anymore. I was the woman who'd burned her whole life to the studs to show everyone what had been living in the walls, and I was standing in the ashes without a mark on me. The trials took the better part of a year. My brother-in-law took a deal and gave them everything for 15 years. My sister got 25 to life. She looked at me once across the courtroom, and there was no apology in it, only hate. And I gave her back a flat, empty stare until they took her out. Adrian got life, no parole. He turned his head to me at the end and mouthed one word, "Why?" And I gave him the smallest shrug. Because by then, we both knew. People had a lot of questions afterward, and I'll answer the ones I'm tired of hearing. The insurance company did not pay me a death benefit. Because I was not dead. Anyone who tells you a company would cut a check on a living policyholder has never filed a claim in their life. What they did was void the fraudulent beneficiary change and pay me a reward for exposing an attempted fraud against them, the kind of finder's fee they're glad to give to avoid a much larger loss. The real money came from the divorce, from my half of everything we'd built, and from the sale of a house I never wanted to sleep in again. It was enough. It was more than enough. I gave a good piece of it away. I started a small foundation, quiet, no plaque with my name on it, that helps people, mostly women, who suspect what's happening to them but can't yet prove it, who need a talk screen they can't ask their family doctor for, a lawyer, a locksmith, somewhere to go on a Saturday night. I hired Cormac to run the part of it that does the looking. The first big donation came from an anonymous widow out east. That was me. Because I left. I sold everything, cut my hair short, and dyed it a color Adrian always said, washed me out, and moved to a city by the cold Atlantic, where the air smells of salt instead of charcoal and nobody knows the woman from the backyard. I took a new name, a real one, legal, paid for honestly. I won't tell you my old one. She was the woman who loved and trusted and baked and got tired and got hunted, and she did everything right and it almost got her killed. She's gone. 6 months to the day after the sentencing, I was working at a little cafe near the water when the bell over the door rang and the detective walked in. Not in his jacket, in a sweater and jeans. He'd left the force, he said, taken a security job, fewer hours. He sat down across from me and ordered a black coffee and didn't pretend to be surprised to find me. He'd gone back over the cottage file, he said quietly. The 2 mugs. Mine, with the residue. His, the clean one, I'd ended up drinking from after the spill. The official story was that he'd mixed up his own cups in his fog, but the splash pattern on the ground, he said, was a controlled tip, not a clumsy slip. And the bear? No tracks, no scat, just a lantern in the brush and a growl on the recording that, when you slow it down, doesn't sound like any bear he's ever heard. Sounds like a frightened woman. I drank my tea and said nothing. It's clean legally, he said. You were stopping him from drugging you. Self-defense, every step. Cleaner than what they planned for you. He turned the coffee cup in his hands. I knew, and I let it stay buried, because my whole job was supposed to be stopping people like him. And you did it better than the system ever would have if you'd just been a good little victim and waited to die properly. The last thing I'd been carrying came loose in my chest, and it didn't come out as fear. It came out as a long breath. Why tell me now? I asked. Because you should know somebody sees you, he said, not the victim, not whatever the podcast people called you, the person who made an impossible choice, and I didn't want it sitting between us. A small, almost shy smile. I'm new in town. I was hoping we could have a conversation that isn't about a crime scene. Over dinner. 2 people who've seen the worst of people, trying to remember the rest. I looked at him a long moment. He knew the darkest thing I'd ever done and he wasn't afraid of it. And in his black and white world he'd made room for my gray. I'm not an easy person, I said. I'm not looking for easy, he said. I'm looking for real. A week later, a thick envelope came with no return address. Inside, my new passport with my new name and a photo of a woman with short dark hair and a steady, confident mouth. I traced the letters with my thumb. I took my old passport out of the safe, the one with the old name, the old face, the stamps from trips I'd taken with a ghost. And I held it to the gas fireplace I'd never once used, and I watched it curl and blacken and bubble down to weightless ash, the identity that had nearly been my death warrant, gone. My phone buzzed on the mantel. A text from him. Found a place for Friday. It's got a grill. I promise I'll only be cooking steaks. Nothing in the sauce. I laughed, a real one, the kind that reaches your eyes. I wrote back that I'd bring the wine and maybe some hot chocolate for after the harmless kind. Then I put the new passport in my bag and stood at the window watching the gray water go gold under a low East Coast sun. And for the first time in longer than I could remember, the only thing on my tongue was the taste of a morning that belonged entirely to me. For a long time, I believed the dangerous thing about Adrian was that he was cruel. I was wrong. The dangerous thing was that he was patient, and he counted on me never being patient back. He built his whole plan on a single bet, that a tired woman wouldn't look too closely, wouldn't ask the second question, wouldn't sit with a feeling long enough to follow it somewhere. Every Saturday I passed out was a brick in a wall he was laying around my life, one at a time, slow enough that I'd call it normal. That's how these things work. Nobody gets destroyed all at once. You get worn down in increments small enough to explain away until the explaining is the thing that's killing you. What saved me wasn't luck and it wasn't rage, though I had plenty of the second one. It was three things working together, and I think about them all the time now. The first was refusing to do the wrong thing back. When I knew the truth, every cell in my body wanted to handle it myself in the dark, and I didn't. I went to Detective Ferris first. I built a case. I kept my hands clean, so the truth could do the heavy lifting. The night at the cottage, I stopped a poisoning. I didn't start one. That line mattered, and holding it is the only reason I get to sleep at night. The second was learning to think instead of just feeling. Pearl handed me the answer to the whole mystery from her porch swing, the heater, the chair I always sat in, the chemical smell drifting across the road. But I only heard it because I'd finally started asking, why only me instead of what's wrong with me? Those are different questions, and the second one is a trap. Adrian wanted me asking what was wrong with me forever. The day I switched questions, the floor of his plan cracked. And the third was simply not quitting on myself when quitting would have been easier and quieter. There were nights in those woods, soaked and freezing, when lying down felt like rest, and rest felt like the end. And I got up anyway, not because I was brave, because I decided I was worth the effort, maybe for the first time in years. If you take one thing from what happened to me, let it be this. When someone keeps telling you you're delicate, weak, too much, too tired, pay attention to who benefits from you believing it. Stay decent, because it's the only ground you can stand on later. Stay sharp, because love should never cost you the ability to think. And stay stubborn about your own life, because no one is coming to be stubborn about it for you. I was treated like the weakest person in that backyard. I turned out to be the only one standing.